Today we are going to revisit a time when Hollywood was experiencing profound changes, and in that context explore the life and legacy of a woman who helped shape television history, Angie Dickinson. The original story of Angie Dickinson's rise to prominence and the complexity of her regrets regarding her most iconic role is compelling enough on its own, but to truly appreciate the depth of her journey, we must delve into the social, cultural, and historical realities that framed her path. We must remember that Angie Dickinson's story is not merely that of a celebrated actress who once captivated audiences. It is also the story of a woman who fought her way out of hardship, refused to become just another objectified starlet, and found herself grappling with the consequences of a breakthrough role that both catapulted her to new heights and, in her view, cost her something precious. To understand her ambivalence fully, we need to trace her life from its earliest days, through the shifting tides of Hollywood in the mid-20th century, and consider how her legacy resonates today. Angie Dickinson was born in North Dakota in 1931, growing up in a time of immense struggle. The nation was gripped by the Great Depression, a severe economic downturn that ravaged families and communities across the United States. For young Angie, life began far from the glittering lights of Los Angeles. In a place where daily survival was often the priority, she lived in a small-town setting surrounded by family and neighbors who faced economic hardship head-on. Food and money were scarce, and opportunities seemed limited. The world was not kind to dreamers then, especially not to a young girl who dared to imagine a future beyond the horizons of her impoverished hometown. And yet, Angie allowed herself to dream. When she could, she went to the local theaters to watch movies, marveling at the larger-than-life figures who flickered across the screen. She was drawn not only to glamorous movie stars like Lana Turner or the elegant Marlene Dietrich, but also to the strength and confidence projected by male leads who commanded attention through their presence and command of the screen. Growing up during the Great Depression also meant witnessing a level of desperation and dysfunction within her own home. As tough as life was, Angie had to contend with an additional heartbreak, her father's struggle with alcoholism. It was a personal tragedy unfolding right before her eyes, and it forced her to grow up faster than any child should. In those days, alcoholism was rarely discussed openly, and there were few resources to help families cope with the problem. Angie, young and impressionable, watched as her father turned to alcohol to numb the pain and stress of life's challenges. This environment could have easily crushed her spirit, made her feel small, and diminished her ambitions. Instead, it steeled her resolve. She decided to fight for the life she wanted, using every ounce of courage to push beyond what fate seemed to have written for her. The hardships of her early years taught her resilience, a quality that would serve her well in Hollywood, a place notoriously quick to discard even the brightest talents if they could not keep pace with changing times. Before she was known in Hollywood, Angie Dickinson was just another girl with big dreams and little evidence that they might come true. As a young woman, she participated in a local Miss America contest. She knew that beauty could open doors, and though she had never considered herself primarily as a beauty queen, she recognized the potential stepping stone this exposure could provide. The world took note of her attractiveness and presence, but more importantly, a casting agent spotted her star potential. Soon after, she caught the attention of producers and found herself stepping onto a much bigger stage than the small town she had known. Joining the Jimmy Durante show as a showgirl was her first significant breakthrough, a sign that perhaps the wide world of entertainment could be hers to conquer. Her official acting career began modestly with an appearance in an episode of Death Valley Days in the early 1950s. She was charming and talented, and audiences embraced her almost immediately. In an era dominated by certain Hollywood archetypes, where many actresses were expected to rely heavily on sex appeal, Angie distinguished herself by focusing on honing her acting chops. She still had beauty in spades, but she refused to let that be her only currency. She studied roles carefully, learning to bring depth and complexity to her characters. She admired strong male leads and wanted to do what they did: carry a film, deliver lines with weight, and shape a narrative, not just decorate it. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Angie Dickinson enjoyed a steady ascent. She appeared in numerous films and television series. Among these were Gun the Man Down, Rio Bravo, and roles in Gunsmoke. Each of these appearances fortified her reputation as a reliable, skilled performer who could hold her own alongside leading men and command attention without resorting solely to glamour or seduction. Unlike many of her contemporaries, who bent to the prevailing typecasting of the time, Angie wanted to be remembered for her skill, her timing, and her unique presence on camera. As she navigated Hollywood, she also resisted attempts to mold her into a Marilyn Monroe-type blonde bombshell. Producers often pressured her to change her looks or posture to fit a particular niche, but Angie stood firm. She wanted to be known as more than a pretty face. It is important to consider the zeitgeist of mid-20th century Hollywood. The studio system was slowly declining, television was on the rise, and the roles available to women were often limited. Women were frequently cast as love interests, damsels in distress, or one-dimensional temptresses. Angie Dickinson fought to break free of these molds, and this determination found its ultimate expression in the 1970s, when she took on the role that would define her career in the public imagination: Sergeant Pepper Anderson in Policewoman. By the time Policewoman aired from 1974 to 1978, Angie Dickinson was already a recognized name. But television was a different game, one that demanded a longer-term commitment and had the potential to bring even greater fame. The character of Sergeant Pepper Anderson was groundbreaking, a strong, capable, independent female police officer who did not exist to serve as a mere romantic interest to a male lead. Instead, she was the lead, a pioneer of sorts, stepping into a role that few women had been allowed to embody on screen. This was the 1970s, a decade marked by the second-wave feminist movement, where women were challenging the status quo in every field. Traditional notions of femininity in female professions were being questioned, and women were entering law enforcement, politics, business, and all manner of professions that had been closed off to them before. Angie Dickinson's portrayal of Pepper Anderson tapped directly into this cultural transformation. Audiences were enthralled by Policewoman. Despite episodes running over an hour, viewers remained glued to their screens. They were fascinated by the idea of a woman holding a badge and gun, making tough decisions, and working alongside her male colleagues as an equal. In a television landscape that largely revolved around male heroes, Pepper Anderson felt refreshingly new. She was not presented as a novelty. She was depicted as a competent professional. Angie's performance was lauded, and she even won a Golden Globe in 1975 for the role. The show was a sensation, and it opened the door for more female-led crime dramas. One could argue that, without Policewoman, the trajectory of female representation in procedural dramas might have been very different. The show paved the way for series like Cagney and Lacey, Charlie's Angels, and countless others that followed, featuring women in complex, authoritative roles. Yet, as the years passed, Angie Dickinson would look back on Policewoman with complicated feelings. Despite the role's cultural significance, she came to regret her decision to take it. Her regret was not rooted in the show's content or its message. She was proud of having portrayed a strong woman. Rather, she believed that committing to a long-term television series had cost her other opportunities and had not brought the financial reward she expected. The creators had assured her that Policewoman would enhance her stardom and income, but the reality was different. She felt tied down, obligated to portray the same character week after week for 4 years. She believed these 4 years effectively trapped her, removing her from the larger film marketplace where her versatility could have earned her more varied and lucrative roles. In an interview with CBS Mornings, Angie expressed that it wasn't worth it and stated plainly that she regretted doing the series. She believed Policewoman had not been financially rewarding, and it had cost her time that she would never get back. While it made her a household name, she felt her range as an actress might have been better showcased elsewhere. This is a common dilemma in Hollywood. Sometimes a role that defines a performer to the public and even breaks ground socially can feel like a cage creatively. In her heart, Angie Dickinson did not want to be remembered for only one role. She had proven her talent early on through a variety of characters in both film and television. And yet Policewoman overshadowed much of that work, branding her permanently in the eyes of fans and industry executives. We must understand that the television landscape of the 1970s was vastly different from today. Residuals and long-term financial security for actors were not as robust as they can be now. Many television stars of that era found that while they became famous, they did not always become wealthy in proportion to their cultural impact. The economics of television had not yet evolved to offer the kind of lucrative deals we see today: streaming royalties, sophisticated merchandising, and large syndication packages that shower actors with perpetual income were not standard. For Angie Dickinson, the disparity between fame and fortune left a bittersweet aftertaste. She might have been recognized on the streets and revered for her role, but the financial payoff was not what she had hoped for. Beyond finances, there was also the artistic toll. Angie Dickinson prided herself on variety and depth. In an earlier era, she had worked with some of Hollywood's most iconic figures. She had starred alongside John Wayne in Rio Bravo, holding her own with the quintessential Hollywood tough guy. She had navigated sets and productions where powerful men still ruled, and she managed to carve her own niche without being pigeonholed simply as a pretty face. She had been part of Hollywood's golden age as it began transitioning to something more modern, more gritty, and more experimental. She had known icons like Frank Sinatra and counted herself among the entertainers who moved easily in the circles of the Rat Pack. Sinatra admired her strength and poise, and in return, she soaked up lessons on charisma and timing from these legendary entertainers. Angie Dickinson was once described as having a quiet confidence that allowed her to shine without overshadowing her co-stars, a skill that earned her respect and steady work. Her reluctance to embrace the sex symbol route was also significant. Many women in mid-century Hollywood had to lean heavily on their looks because the industry gave them few alternatives. Angie Dickinson, though undeniably beautiful, didn't want to be remembered for her body or her face alone. She wanted her performances to resonate. In Policewoman, she portrayed a character who was attractive but, more importantly, competent, tough, and professional. By the mid-1970s, audiences were ready to see women step into roles traditionally reserved for men, and Angie delivered that. Ironically, in delivering what the era demanded, and in becoming an emblem of women's changing status in entertainment and society, she sacrificed some of her personal career goals. Another layer of complexity in Angie's life came not from Hollywood, but from her personal struggles. Throughout her career, she had challenges in her personal life that tested her resilience. her marriage to composer Burt Bacharach brought its own complications. They married in 1965, and while it was a high-profile union that fascinated the public, it also brought sorrow and difficulty. The couple had a daughter, Nikki, born prematurely in 1966. Nikki had health challenges and was later diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Her condition required attention and care, and it deeply affected Angie's life decisions and emotional well-being. The Hollywood spotlight can be unforgiving when personal tragedies strike, and Angie found herself balancing the demands of a highly visible career with the private heartbreak of a child struggling to find her place in the world. Nikki's condition, an eventual tragic decision to take her own life in 2007, were among the darkest chapters in Angie Dickinson's life. The pain of losing her only child was immeasurable, and it forced her to step back from the limelight to grieve and to comprehend such a loss. Years after Nikki's death, Angie returned to the public eye, if only occasionally. She appeared in a few roles, but her priorities had shifted. Age and experience had taught her that life's true values do not rest solely in the pursuit of more fame or more money. She had been there and done that. Now in her 90s, Angie Dickinson lives a relatively private life. She has stated that she is not eager to play the stereotypical grandmother roles Hollywood often assigns to actresses of her age. She does not see the point in accepting parts that do not challenge her or that reduce her legacy to cliché. She has mentioned the idea of a one-woman show, but thus far it remains just an idea. Her days are spent quietly, often in the company of her cats, away from the sets and cameras that once defined her world. If we consider the broader historical and cultural significance of Angie Dickinson's life and career, we see a woman who emerged from the shadows of the Great Depression to become one of Hollywood's brightest lights. She fought through the stifling norms of mid-century American cinema, where women were often supporting characters to male leads, and rose to a position where she could lead a television series. Through Pepper Anderson, Angie Dickinson offered the world a vision of female strength that went beyond the simple narratives Hollywood had traditionally provided. Policewoman aired in the wake of the feminist movement's strong push for equality. Women were marching for their rights, demanding equal pay, and stepping into arenas once deemed off-limits. Pepper Anderson personified these changes. She wore the police badge at a time when women in real life were entering law enforcement in greater numbers. Although the show was fictional, it contributed to the normalization of women in such roles, inspiring some viewers, especially young women, to consider that they too could become police officers, detectives, or any number of professions that had once seemed unattainable. Yet Angie Dickinson's regret reminds us that personal gain and cultural impact do not always align. One can break ground and open doors for others while still feeling that the endeavor was a personal setback. This paradox is not unique to Angie's experience. Many entertainers, artists, and public figures find that their most recognized achievements come with trade-offs they never anticipated. For Angie, it appears that Policewoman was that double-edged sword, a crowning achievement that also served as a professional trap. The show made her even more of a star, but it tethered her to a single identity and consumed years she might have spent building on her film career in more diverse ways. It provided household recognition, but not the wealth or artistic range she desired. In many ways, Angie Dickinson's story is also the story of how Hollywood changed from the 1950s to the 1970s. In the 50s, the studio system had power over contracts and often molded stars into certain images. Angie entered the business as that system was crumbling, and she adapted well to the freer but more uncertain climate of the 60s. By the 70s, as the film industry faced competition from television, new rules were being written. The 70s brought grittier, more realistic storytelling in both film and television, and Policewoman fit perfectly into that environment. Gone were the squeaky clean images of women always waiting at home. Pepper Anderson chased criminals through dark alleys. Viewers embraced this new realism. Despite all the struggles and regrets, Angie Dickinson stands as a living legend. Her legacy endures not just because of Policewoman, but also because of what she represented. A woman who refused to be boxed in by stereotypes, who learned from early hardship and heartbreak, and who always strove to be the master of her own destiny. She never allowed herself to be reduced to mere ornamentation in an industry that often sought to reduce women to just that. Her courage in forging her path and in speaking honestly about her regrets, about not earning what she hoped for, about devoting so many years to a single series, adds a layer of humanity to her star persona. Rather than simply revel in past triumphs, she candidly acknowledges that her career choices had downsides, reminding us that idols are human. In recent decades, we have witnessed a reappraisal of older shows and stars. With the rise of streaming services, viewers can rediscover classics and cult favorites at the click of a button. Younger audiences who were not alive during the 1970s can watch Policewoman today and marvel at its then revolutionary portrayal of a female lead in law enforcement. They can also question the pay structures and contractual arrangements that left someone like Angie Dickinson feeling shortchanged. These modern viewers bring a new perspective, aware that many actors of the past fought silent battles over creative control, fair compensation, and the right to choose their own paths. As the entertainment industry continues to evolve, Angie Dickinson's reflections on her life and work gain fresh relevance. The conversation about fair pay, about an actor's right to control her image, and about the true meaning of success has not ended. Even today, actresses must still contend with ageism, typecasting, and pay disparities. Angie's story echoes through time, reminding younger generations that progress has been made, but that it has come at a cost, borne by pioneers like her. Another dimension to consider is how society has changed its attitude towards mental health and personal tragedy. When Nikki Bacharach took her own life, the societal understanding of mental health challenges was still developing. The heartbreak Angie endured, the time she took away from the public eye to heal, and her subsequent quiet life all speak to a woman who understood that there were things more important than sustaining a public image. Now, in an age where mental health advocacy is more visible, we can look back at Angie's personal struggles with greater empathy, understanding how difficult it must have been to mourn privately while being a public figure. Angie Dickinson's status as a living legend provides her the luxury to speak honestly. She might not have had the courage or the freedom to publicly regret Policewoman in the decades immediately following the show's end. Now, she has the perspective of a long life, the confidence of having survived the ups and downs of the industry and personal tragedies. She can calmly state her truth that despite all the glory, that show was not worth it to her personally. We can appreciate the complexity of that statement, knowing that what was not worth it to her might have been life-changing to a young girl who saw Pepper Anderson and thought, I can do that too. Finally, Angie Dickinson's story encourages us to look beyond the glossy surface of Hollywood's success stories. Behind every iconic role and groundbreaking performance, there is a person with dreams, fears, hopes, and regrets. Angie shows us that it is possible to change an industry and influence a generation while still longing for what might have been. She teaches us that triumph and regret can coexist, that a single role can be both a gift and a burden. As for Angie's future, she has made it clear that she values her privacy, her independence, and her personal comfort. Rather than chase late career roles that do not inspire her, she chooses to live quietly, occasionally granting interviews, reflecting on the past, and spending time with her cats. The Hollywood machine moves on, new stars emerge, new shows captivate audiences. But Angie Dickinson's legacy remains intact. She was a trailblazer, not just for the role she played, but for the stance she took in shaping her own career and for the honesty with which she revisits her past decisions. Her story reminds us that Hollywood's history is made up of countless individuals, each with their own complex narrative. Angie Dickinson's journey from a small town in North Dakota to the glamorous but often merciless world of Hollywood embodies the American dream in all its complexity: hope, struggle, achievement, disillusionment, resilience, and self-discovery. She bore witness to the industry's seismic changes over decades, took part in those changes, and left a legacy that still resonates. Angie Dickinson may regret one significant role, but there can be no doubt that she left her mark. The strength, independence, and complexity she brought to her characters stand as a testament to her skill and courage. Today, as we continue to push for more inclusive, varied, and equitable storytelling, her work in Policewoman and beyond shines as an early beacon of what could be achieved if we broadened our notions of who a leading lady could be. She may have chosen to pull back from the spotlight, but her name and contributions remain etched in Hollywood's collective memory. If you are curious to delve deeper into the intricate relationships and on-set tensions of that era, consider the stories of other legendary figures who struggled with their co-stars and the pressures of working in Hollywood's challenging environment. Angie Dickinson, for her part, is remembered for maintaining cordial relationships and for respecting the craft. She was and is a survivor of personal tragedy, professional setbacks, and an industry that often placed profit over personal fulfillment. Her narrative stands as a multifaceted chapter in the grand tapestry of cinematic history. From her humble beginnings to the heights of stardom and the quiet reflections of her later years, Angie Dickinson remains a figure of deep fascination and respect. She reminds us that every star in Hollywood's firmament is a human being, navigating a complex interplay of personal ambition, public expectations, cultural shifts, and economic realities. And that is perhaps the greatest lesson she offers. Behind the lights and cameras, beyond the iconic roles and public acclaim, each performer's journey is uniquely their own, filled with moments of glory and shadows of regret. For Angie Dickinson, acknowledging those regrets and sharing them with the world in her later years has made her story all the more human, all the more genuine, and all the more instructive for future generations of performers and audiences alike.